Sup people, Shiny Piece here, and welcome back to the review series that takes longer to come out than the actual series that I'm reviewing. For those of you who didn't see my Phantom Blood review, I said that under request I would be covering the first 3 story arcs of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure in separate videos. Good news! The user who proposed I review the anime back on my original account has contacted me and confirmed that the 2012 version was the one they wanted me to cover. Thanks Brainwave Productions, sorry I forgot your name. I've already reviewed part 1, so now I'm on to part 2, Battle Tendency. There will be spoilers for Phantom Blood in this review, so I suggest you watch my video on it before watching this one. In brief, I didn't think the show was anything special. I didn't hate it, but only because it wasn't worth hating. It was forgettable at best, it was annoying at worst, and it's a show that I normally wouldn't bother reviewing if I wasn't under request. Battle Tendency, however, I think is one of the best shonens I've ever seen. It takes pretty much every problem that I had with part 1 and improves them in ways that I didn't think the show would be capable of, while also giving me a healthy dose of corniness. It's been a while since I did a review on a show that I actually like, so let's not waste any more time and finally start talking about Fabulous Poses, the show. Battle Tendency takes place 50 years after the events of Phantom Blood in the late 30s. It gives us the origins of the mysterious mask that started the show's conflict, while also showing the adventures and growth of the descendants to the previous protagonists. The creation of the stone mask goes back to nearly extinct creatures called the Pillar Men, who've clearly never missed Thigh Day before in their lives, that are similar to the vampires that the mask would turn a human into, only far stronger and can actually eat said vampires. One of them desired to have complete perfection, which led to him creating the mask in hopes that it would help him fulfill his ordeals. Although all it could do was transform the human test subjects into weaker forms of their species, which went on to be called vampires. When the rest of their tribe retaliated against the radical in fear of what the mask could potentially bring, they were massacred entirely at his hands, leaving only 4 survivors. They've awakened from their 1,000-year-long hibernation to finally perfect the mask with a jewel called the Red Stone of Asia, which will rid them of their weaknesses to sunlight and the technique of Hammond, transforming them into unkillable gods. It's up to the grandsons of Jonathan Joestar and Will A. Zeppeli to defeat them before they can achieve their goal, and of course, save the world. The first act of Battle Tendency builds up to the main antagonists by giving us quick yet well done fight scenes, which both only take up an episode. One being against a vampire named Straitso, who activated the mask in desire for eternal youth, and the other actually being against one of the Pillar Men named Santana, the weakest of the 4 survivors. Even though these introductory villains are defeated, they leave our protagonist wounded and overwhelmed. Knowing that they're the weakest obstacles in the show, it builds up the tension that the remaining Pillar Men are severe threats that can't be allowed to exceed their current strength. The advantage of the somewhat slower pace that Part 2 has compared to Part 1 is that it allows the audience to get to know the characters and understand the dire consequences should they fail their mission before getting into the meat of things without feeling like it's dragging out the plot. It certainly works better than, hey, look at this annoying voiced rich kid who's having family issues, by the way, his brother's a vampire, deal with it! Part 2 also gives us more insight into the technique of Hammond and some of its history, which is something that I felt was missing from Part 1, as opposed to last time where the technique was a generic plot device to give the MC something to fight with. Here it's a well thought out power that's interesting to explore in its uses and its background, which makes the protagonist's growth with it all the more intriguing, but I'll get more into that later. Right now, I want to talk about our leads. Our MC this time around is very originally introduced. A poor victim is being harassed by some poo-poo faces when our hero comes in and seriously, I'm getting this cliche again in the exact same show. I swear, if I had a dime for every time I've seen this trope, I'd be rich enough to look for something to actually do with my life. Come on, I've seen the whole hero saves the poor victim from over-the-top one-note baddies multiple times. There's literally nothing you can do to make it interesting.
どんなマジックを使ったのか。ぶっ飛んだ線は圧倒的パワーでポリコーの指を完全にへし折り、肉を弾き飛ばした。
He just used a soda bottle as a gun. I don't know whether that's awesome or stupid. It's all Pid. Our JoJo for this story is Joseph Joestar, the grandson of our previous JoJo, Jonathan. Oh, for the love of all things doujinshi related, thank you for Joseph. Jonathan's defining character trait was his desire to be quote-unquote gentlemanly. Basically, all there was to his personality was being polite, and that's it. So when Joseph came into the picture, I was expecting him to keep up the family tradition of being a piece of toast that only cares about being kind of nice and nothing else. What I got was a charismatic, one-liner spewing badass. The MC for this story is automatically an improvement from Jonathan because Joseph has this thing we viewers like to call a personality.
ここよここにちゃんと俺がいるのを見落とさないでほしいのよ
Joseph manages to stand out in nearly every scene he's in with his sarcastic and hot-headed attitude that completely chews the scenery. The main thing most fans remember him for, in this arc at least, is how he's able to so clearly read others that he can predict their next line word for word.
てめえの次に吐くセリフは思い知ったかこの原始人が思い知ったかこの原始人が
Even though predicting his enemies' actions and lines is Joseph's thing, the show manages to mix itself up to keep his fight scenes interesting, rather than just having him read a few lines ahead in the script for every fight, which makes every time he does so all the more satisfying. During his fight against the Pillarmen, Joseph is allied by Willie Zeppeli's grandson, Caesar.
だがその男はどうだ ?3 ヶ月前まで自分の祖父のことを何一つ知らなかったというではないかいい加減なやつだ気に食わん
なんだてめえ
Oh wow, they seem like two headstrong polar opposites with opposing viewpoints who don't see eye to eye and who argue a lot. I'm sure they will not in any way learn to get past their differences to work together and form a mutual friendship. Hang on, are we gonna be seeing some Barraman on Barraman action with magic breathing involved? I kinda wanna see that now. In all seriousness, I'll take this cliche dynamic any day over I consider you a son now even though I've only known you for like a week. Caesar's motive is simple enough. He wants to continue where his father and grandfather left off, destroying the mask and putting an end to the terror that it's caused. The problem with Zeppeli in part 1 was he had potential to be an interesting character, but because the pacing of the show is so fast, he died almost immediately after he was introduced, and never got the chance to live up to said potential. The slower pace in part 2 allows for Caesar to have more screen time and more chances to develop as someone the audience would actually care about and want to see more of. Being a straightforward and focused person, Caesar is a likable enough character on his own, and he works as a good voice of reason to Joseph's more impulsive personality.
あいつら本気に取りやがってせめて1年って言うんだった
あのなジョジョ貴様なんかふざけてるな真剣に考えてんだろうな
The two obviously don't start out too well, but when Joseph shows himself to be a respectable person who will take a risk to protect Caesar and Speedwagon from the Pillarmen, they begin to form respect for each other. It creates a nice dynamic in character and skills as Caesar relies on his technique and capabilities in Hammond during combat, while Joseph relies more on his brains and wit. Speaking of Hammond, time for me to start talking about how Part 2 improves on the concept of magic breathing. In Part 1, it wasn't a terrible idea, but the show didn't do anything with it that would invest me, whereas Part 2 does almost everything with it that I wish we could have seen originally. The show goes into great detail about how much skill it takes to wield it, and how different techniques can come out depending on how the user decides to perform with it, as they could use it to make essentially anything a weapon, which opens the door to so many things that happen with it. It can be channeled through steel balls, it can be used with fucking bubbles, it can even be used with a scarf. Now that is the perfect combination of awesome and stupid. Along with interesting uses, they also give us some lore behind the technique. It dates back to near the beginning of humanity when humans developed it to fight against the Pillarmen and the vampires that spawned from their stone mask. Of course, when they show the lore, it's brief, but I love it when anime gives some background to their superpowers so they don't come off as bland plot devices. The only thing I wish they went more into detail about was the apparent ability to heal someone that was used to introduce it, then not really explored. But it's well done nonetheless. Almost makes me kinda sad that Hammond was replaced with Stans, starting with Stardust Crusaders, but I'll explain why I don't mind the change and why I like Stans when I get around to reviewing that arc next century. The stakes are high for our heroes as they have to improve their Hammond to at all stand a chance against the ambiguously gay trio. While I found Dio in the last arc to be more enjoyable, our antagonists for this arc are pretty great. There's the honor-bound Wemu, the competitive Essidisi, and last but not least, Put Put, the creator of the stone mask. We get to see their personalities during their first interactions with our protagonists. When Joseph is seriously injured, Wemu has the chance to easily kill him, but his pride lets him be persuaded by the human's offer to fight him again after a month when he claims he'll be a superb fighter and able to fight him fairly. To make sure he isn't bluffing, Wemu puts a poisonous ring inside his body that will take effect after 30 days, with the antidote being in his manly piercing. Essidisi, just wanting in on the fun, decides to also put in a poisonous ring, but Put Put's too edgy and serious for that, so he passes. During the overarching fight against the Pillar Men, our leads are aided by allies who either provide them with useful information or help them on the battlefield. The first one we get introduction to is the returning side character from Phantom Blood, Speedwagon. Speedwagon, the useless, annoying, charming, lovable, wonderful character that only a brain-damaged ostrich could not love. All of the other memorable characters from Phantom Blood, like Dio, forget them! Speedwagon! He may not be a major character, but Speedwagon isn't at all as useless here as he was in part 1. After he started an oil business which made him dirty rich, he created the Speedwagon Foundation, which serves to aid the Joestars by providing them with things they'd need, even in future arcs after Speedwagon's death from a heart attack. Speedwagon is undeniably a useful and needed character, but that doesn't mean I have to like him, and it doesn't mean that I can't find his constant need to narrate everything that's going on to be annoying. Our protagonists are also aided by people who help them in combat, the one I like in particular being Lisa. She's introduced as a mysterious woman with unknown origins and an expert of Hammond. She serves as an instructor to help Joseph and Caesar improve their abilities after they're defeated by the Pillar Men, which proves to be successful when they're able to defeat Essidisi after training under her for almost a month. At a surprising tie-in to the first arc, she's revealed to be the baby that Irina saved from the shipwreck where Jonathan had died, and was raised by former Hammond user Straitso, who taught her how to use Hammond until she was 18, when she was entrusted to be the guardian of the Red Stone of Asia. Sadly, there's not much more I can say about Lisa without giving away a major twist, so I'll talk more about her during spoiler territory. Another ally throughout the show are Nazis. I'm not joking, they do the salute and everything. I never thought I'd see the day where I say that a cyborg Nazi was one of my favorite characters, but wouldn't you know? The German army, commanded by von Stroheim, were the first to discover the 3 main Pillar Men, and were the ones who revived Santana to do research on him, which led to Joseph learning about his main enemies. Stroheim appeared to be dead after the fight with Santana, but because anime, he could be revived as a cyborg. Remember, if you're blown to bits, all it takes is a monocle and you'll be just fine. The army has plans to take the Red Stone of Asia to use its powers to enhance their science even further, and agree to work with the protagonist to keep it out of their enemies' hands. Stroheim is the over-the-top commander who claims that German science is the best thing in the world, and he doesn't want you to forget it. If someone could please make me a remix of this guy's dialogue, that would be great. During the third act is when we get the backstories of Caesar and Lisa and how they came to be in their current situations. Now, what separates the backstories given to them from the overly sappy backstories in the previous arc, you may be asking? Let me make something clear. I'm not against giving characters sad backstories. I'm against trying to excuse unlikability with having a sad past, or trying to make a sad past the hooking point of the character. We got to know Caesar and Lisa as good and likable people before we get their backgrounds, which helps make said backgrounds feel more interesting and less like they're trying to squeeze as much sympathy out of them as possible. Now, let's talk about that one episode that made me bawl my eyes out. But first, we must do what this show does best. Sad flashback time! Back when Caesar was a child, his father Mario left him to work with Lisa in investigation of the Pillarmen without any explanation to his children, while their relatives stole whatever they had left in his absence. Because of this fact, Caesar grew up resenting his father while living as a delinquent. And he didn't even have to dye his hair for it, lucky guy. While out for revenge against his presumably neglectful parent, Caesar had his first encounter with the hibernating Pillarmen, accidentally activating a trap they set which would allow them to swallow whomever activated it. Though he didn't even recognize his own child, Mario let himself be drained instead to protect whom he thought was a bystander. After watching his father's sacrifice and learning through Lisa his reasonings for leaving his family, Caesar regained his respect for Mario and decided to continue the mission of destroying the mask. After getting this backstory, Caesar loses his life in a fight against Wamu when getting the antidote for Joseph. Not only does Caesar's death scene feel earned and, dare I say, heartbreaking, it creates the impression that Joseph is put at a disadvantage from losing his partner, especially since there's lip service given that if Caesar had been fighting Putt-Putt, he would have either killed or seriously injured him. When Caesar sends the antidote to Joseph in his final bubble, Wamu decides to let it go out of respect for how Caesar grew as a fighter since their first encounter. These scenes help to give an emotional weight to Joseph's fight against Wamu, and leading to them obtaining respect for each other as honorable warriors. It succeeds in making Wamu more than a one-note villain without building towers of screaming "feel sorry for him." But Putt-Putt is a big mean sneaky doo-doo face who doesn't fight with honor, so he must die painfully, even if it takes a million years for him to finally hit the sack. Towards the end of the third act, we get the twist that Lisa is Joseph's mother, and the reasoning for why no one knows of her origins. Her real name is Elizabeth, using the name Lisa as an alias. As a young adult, Elizabeth eventually married Irina and Jonathan's son George, who was serving as a soldier in the military. After learning that his higher-ranking military official was one of the surviving zombies that worked under Dio, George was murdered when he tried to confront him. Isn't it super convenient that the zombie never had to be out in the sunlight during that time he was pretending to be human? Or was he allowed to carry a sun umbrella with him whenever he went outside? Acting through impulse without thought, Elizabeth killed the zombie as soon as she heard the news. Unfortunately, the idea that a zombie was serving as a military official was just a tad unbelievable, so she had to flee the scene to avoid retaliation. With the help of the Speedwagon Foundation, she was able to erase any proof that she was still alive, and thus acquire the alias Lisa. Not wanting history to repeat itself and to keep Joseph away from Hammond, Irina told him that both of his parents had died. She wanted Hammond to be kept out of his life in hopes that he wouldn't experience the same fate that his father and grandfather did. Come on, nobody told me that this show would hit me in the feels. I was expecting nothing but lighthearted 80s cheese. Irina's attempts turned out to be futile since Joseph was able to use Hammond since childhood, as the ability to use it ran within his blood. Oh, so Hammond is hereditary, okay. So how come George didn't get it from Jonathan? If the show didn't want this question to come up, they should have kept a line from the manga that said George just wasn't that well trained in the technique. After we get off the feels train, Putt-Putt manages to activate the mask with the Red Stone of Asia that turns him into a seemingly indestructible god who's able to completely manipulate life. The last few episodes leading up to his defeat are the absolute definition of stupid fun, from Putt-Putt turning his body into killer squirrels to piranhas. Now that is Opid. He's so overpowered that the only way our MC can actually defeat him is by launching him into space where he'll freeze into a floating statue and be forced to keep thinking about death until he eventually stops thinking altogether. Well, now he knows what it's like to be in high school. That joke was too easy. I'm sorry.
これも計算のうちがジョジョ当たり前だぜこのジョジョは何から何まで
All except for Josuke! He was an accident! The show ends on a positive, feel-good note, showing the conclusions of the characters that we got to know before leaving with a cliffhanger for the upcoming arc. Overall, all internet jokes aside, Battle Tendency is stupidly awesome. It works as a good sequel to the first arc as well as a standalone show. It knows when to keep the pacing slow and when to speed it up, the characters are enjoyable, the story is interesting, and it's filled to the brim with delightful corniness. In a way, it almost makes having to sit through Phantom Blood worth it. If you're in the mood for something drenched in everything great about 80s anime with polished 2010s animation, then I'd recommend giving it a watch. Next on my review list is the third story arc in the show, Stardust Crusaders, which you've probably been looking forward to me talking about the most. With that, I'm out.